The sun cast golden rays across the pristine suburban street as birds chirped cheerfully from tree branches. Houses stood in perfect formation, each with a manicured lawn and spotless driveway. This neighborhood represented the American dream, peaceful, welcoming, and secure. At least, that's what Olivia and Darnell Wilson believed when they signed the papers on their new home. Olivia and Darnell had sacrificed much to reach this point in their lives. Olivia, with her warm smile and natural ability to connect with others, always led with kindness. Darnell, her husband of 8 years, possessed a thoughtful demeanor and unwavering support for his wife's ambitions. Together, they formed an unbreakable partnership. This move represented their fresh start, a chance to plant roots in a community that appeared picture-perfect. However, they were unaware that their arrival wasn't universally celebrated. As Olivia adjusted the decorative ribbon on her carefully prepared welcome basket containing a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, gourmet crackers, and a handwritten note, she turned to Darnell with uncertainty in her eyes. "Do you think I went overboard with this?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervous energy. Darnell chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Liv, most people would have just picked up some store-bought cookies. You spent hours on this masterpiece. It's perfect. They'll appreciate the gesture." Olivia nodded, trying to calm her nerves. She'd always believed first impressions mattered, especially when establishing yourself in a new community. If you're enjoying this story so far, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from our viewers around the world. As Olivia and Darnell strolled down the sidewalk toward their neighbor's house, the clicking of her heels against the pavement seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet neighborhood. She couldn't help but notice the subtle movement of curtains in nearby windows, faces appearing briefly before vanishing when the couple glanced their way. A dog barked sharply from a yard across the street, breaking the eerie silence. "Are people watching us?" Olivia whispered, clutching the gift basket closer to her chest. Darnell gave a slight shrug, his eyes scanning the houses around them. "Probably just curious about the newcomers," he replied, though the tension in his voice suggested he'd noticed the scrutiny too. When they finally reached their destination, a 2-story colonial with immaculate landscaping, Olivia hesitated before the front door. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea after all," she murmured, suddenly second-guessing herself. Darnell placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Come on, Liv, we're just being friendly neighbors. Nothing wrong with that." Taking a deep breath, Olivia nodded and knocked gently on the door. The sound echoed down the silent street, and for a moment nothing happened. Then came the soft creak of the door opening just a few inches. A woman with shoulder-length blonde hair peered out cautiously, her expression guarded. She didn't offer a smile or greeting, just studied them with cool, assessing eyes. Undeterred, Olivia flashed her warmest smile. "Hi there, we're your new neighbors, Olivia and Darnell Wilson. We just moved into the gray house down the street and wanted to introduce ourselves." The woman blinked, her face remaining impassive. She didn't open the door any wider. "Oh, hello," she finally said, her tone flat. Olivia's heart sank slightly, but she maintained her smile. "We brought you a little welcome basket. Well, I guess it's more like a please welcome us basket," she added with a light laugh. The woman hesitated before slowly widening the door. She reached out and accepted the basket with reluctant hand. "Greg," she called over her shoulder, "the new people are here." A tall man with salt and pepper hair appeared behind her, his face immediately lighting up with a genuine smile that contrasted sharply with his wife's cold demeanor. "Well, hello there," he exclaimed, stepping forward and extending his hand. "I'm Greg Peterson, and this is my wife, Jennifer. Welcome to Oakwood Heights." His handshake was firm and warm, instantly putting Olivia more at ease. "Please, come in," Greg continued, gesturing them inside. "Don't mind the mess, we weren't expecting company." Olivia and Darnell exchanged quick glances before stepping into the immaculate home. The interior was straight out of a design magazine. Hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and tasteful artwork adorned walls painted in neutral tones. There wasn't a speck of dust or item out of place. "What a beautiful home," Olivia remarked sincerely as Greg led them to a sitting area. "Make yourselves comfortable," Greg said, motioning toward a plush sectional sofa. Olivia and Darnell sat down while Greg took a seat in an armchair across from them. Jennifer remained standing, arms crossed over her chest. "I'll be right back," she said curtly before disappearing into what Olivia presumed was the kitchen. Greg launched into friendly conversation, asking about their move, previous neighborhood, and profession. His warmth and genuine interest stood in stark contrast to Jennifer's coldness. "The community is really wonderful," Greg assured them. "Great schools if you have kids, and the neighborhood association organizes some fun events throughout the year." Olivia nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds lovely. We're really looking forward to getting involved." After several minutes of pleasant conversation with Greg, Olivia decided to make another attempt with Jennifer. "Would you like some help in the kitchen?" she offered, standing up. "I'd be happy to give you a hand with whatever you're doing." Greg smiled appreciatively. "That's very kind of you, Olivia." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her expression unchanged. "Fine," she said with a slight nod. "I was just about to make some coffee." As Olivia followed Jennifer into the kitchen, she could feel the tension radiating from the woman's rigid posture. Behind her, she heard Greg engaging Darnell in conversation about local sports teams, their laughter creating a stark contrast to the frosty atmosphere she was walking into. What would you do in Olivia's situation? Would you try to break the ice, or keep your distance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The kitchen was a marvel of modern design, pristine white marble countertops, stainless steel appliances that gleamed under the recessed lighting, and an organization system so perfect it seemed almost clinical. Not a single item appeared out of place. "Your kitchen is stunning," Olivia said warmly, hoping to spark a conversation. "I love the marble countertops." Jennifer barely acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod as she moved efficiently around the space. She opened a cabinet and retrieved 2 ceramic mugs, placing them on the counter with mechanical precision. "Thanks," she replied flatly, her tone indicating the end of that conversational thread. The silence between them grew uncomfortable as Jennifer measured coffee grounds into a filter. Olivia shifted her weight from one foot to another, searching for another topic. "Have you lived in the neighborhood long?" she asked. 7 years, Jennifer answered without elaboration or reciprocating with a question of her own. Olivia nodded, trying not to let the awkwardness affect her. Her eyes wandered around the kitchen, taking in the details, the matching appliances, the carefully arranged cookbooks, the spotless backsplash, until something caught her attention. On the counter near the window sat a small, ornate golden box. The sunlight streaming through the window made it glimmer, highlighting its intricate design and craftsmanship. It was clearly an item of significance, perhaps even an antique, with delicate engravings covering its surface. "What a beautiful box," Olivia remarked, pointing toward. "Is it a family heirloom? The craftsmanship looks extraordinary." The change in Jennifer's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Her movements, which had been brisk but controlled, suddenly froze. The coffee scoop in her hand hovered mid-air as she slowly turned to look at the golden box. Her eyes narrowed, and a flash of something, alarm, suspicion, crossed her face. "It's private," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the kitchen like a knife. "It's been in my family for generations." Before Olivia could respond, Jennifer quickly moved to the box, snatched it up, and placed it inside a nearby cabinet, closing the door with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Olivia blinked, taken aback by the intensity of Jennifer's reaction. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry. It's just so beautiful, I couldn't help but notice it." Jennifer didn't respond. Her back remained turned to Olivia as she resumed making coffee, but her shoulders were visibly tense, her movements now jerky and agitated. The atmosphere in the kitchen had shifted from merely uncomfortable to downright hostile. Olivia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She hadn't intended to upset Jennifer or invade her privacy. She was simply trying to make conversation, to find some common ground with her new neighbor. Now, she felt as though she'd committed some terrible faux pas without knowing what line she'd crossed. "Is there anything I can help with?" Olivia asked softly, trying to salvage the situation. "No," Jennifer replied tersely. "I've got it under control." Olivia stood awkwardly in the middle of the kitchen, unsure whether to stay or return to the living room. She glanced toward the cabinet where Jennifer had hidden the box, then back at Jennifer's rigid posture. The tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. After what felt like an eternity, Olivia decided to retreat, I'll just go back and join the men. Then she said hesitantly. Jennifer didn't respond or turn around. She continued preparing the coffee as if Olivia wasn't even there. As Olivia left the kitchen, she could feel Jennifer's eyes following her, burning into her back. She glanced over her shoulder just before exiting, and caught Jennifer staring at her with an expression that made her blood run cold, a mixture of suspicion and contempt that seemed wildly disproportionate to their brief interaction. In the living room, Darnell and Greg were laughing together, apparently hitting it off. Darnell looked up as Olivia entered, his smile fading slightly when he noticed her expression. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly as she sat beside him. Olivia forced a smile. "Yes, everything's fine," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Darnell's eyes searched hers, clearly not believing her response, but he didn't press the issue in front of Greg. Instead, he gently placed his hand over hers, a silent gesture of support that Olivia appreciated more than words could express. If you were in Olivia's position, how would you have handled Jennifer's strange reaction? Would you have pressed for an explanation or backed away like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments. In the living room, Greg continued his friendly chatter, seemingly oblivious to the tension emanating from his wife. Olivia tried to focus on the conversation, but her mind kept replaying Jennifer's strange reaction in the kitchen. What about that golden box had triggered such hostility? "Well," Greg said, glancing at his watch, "I hate to cut this short, but I've got a conference call in about 20 minutes. "Of course," Darnell replied, standing up. "We should get going anyway. Thanks for having us over." Olivia rose from the sofa, relieved that the uncomfortable visit was coming to an end. "Yes, thank you for your hospitality," she added politely, though the words felt hollow given Jennifer's coldness. As they moved toward the front door, Jennifer emerged from the kitchen, her face set in a tight expression. Greg placed his hand on the doorknob, ready to bid them farewell when Jennifer's voice cut through the air like ice. "Wait," she said sharply. Everyone turned to look at her. Jennifer stood with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her eyes fixed on Olivia with unmistakable accusation. "Something's missing," she stated, her voice low but clear. Olivia blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry." "One of my gold spoons," Jennifer continued, her tone growing harder with each word. "It's gone." The atmosphere in the entryway instantly transformed from awkward to tense. Darnell shifted slightly, moving closer to Olivia as if sensing the sudden danger in Jennifer's accusation. "There must be some misunderstanding," Darnell said calmly, though Olivia could hear the controlled anger beneath his words. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "No misunderstanding. It was in that box on the counter, the one she was so interested in," she said, pointing directly at Olivia. "And now it's gone." Olivia felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. Her heart began to race as the implication of Jennifer's words sank in. I didn't take anything," she stammered, shocked by the accusation. "You were the only one in the kitchen with me." Jennifer pressed, her voice rising slightly. "I think we need to check your purse." Greg looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Jennifer, maybe you just misplaced it," he suggested gently. "Let's not jump to conclusions. I know exactly where it was, Greg," Jennifer snapped, not taking her eyes off Olivia. "It was in the box before she went into the kitchen, and now it's gone." Olivia's initial shock was rapidly giving way to indignation. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand you're upset about your spoon, but I did not take it," she said firmly. "I would never do something like that." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, pretending to collect mail or water plants while obviously watching the confrontation unfolding on the Petersons' porch. An elderly woman across the street didn't even attempt to disguise her interest, standing on her lawn with her arms crossed, staring openly. Jennifer stepped closer, her face flushed with anger. "If you have nothing to hide, then you won't mind if we check your purse," she insisted. Darnell's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice low but intense. "My wife is not a thief, and we don't appreciate being treated like criminals." The standoff continued for several tense seconds. Olivia could feel the weight of the neighbors' stares, the judgment in their eyes. She thought about refusing the search, about walking away with her dignity intact, but something told her that would only make things worse.
that Jennifer would use her refusal as proof of guilt. "Fine," Olivia said finally, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "You can look in my purse. I have nothing to hide." She handed her handbag to Darnell, who hesitated before passing it to Greg. Jennifer snatched it from her husband's hands and began rifling through it with obvious eagerness. Greg looked at Olivia apologetically. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," he said quietly. For a moment, Jennifer's search seemed to yield nothing, and Olivia felt a surge of vindication. But then Jennifer's expression changed, her eyes widening with triumph, as she pulled something from the depths of the purse. "What's this?" she asked, her voice dripping with false innocence, as she held up a gleaming gold spoon. Olivia stared at the object in disbelief. I didn't," she stammered, unable to process what she was seeing. Darnell stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "This is absurd," he said firmly. "Someone put that there. Olivia would never steal anything." Jennifer's smile was cold and satisfied. "The evidence speaks for itself," she said, turning to Greg. "Call the police. Would you have allowed your bag to be searched, or would you have refused? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below." The wail of sirens pierced the suburban tranquility, growing louder as the police cruiser approached the Peterson residence. Neighbors who had been discreetly watching from behind curtains now emerged onto their front lawns, abandoning all pretense of casual activity. Some pulled out phones to record the unfolding drama, while others huddled in small groups, whispering theories and judgment. Olivia stood frozen on the porch, her face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. This was supposed to be a simple neighborly visit. How had it spiraled into this nightmare? Beside her, Darnell's expression had hardened into controlled fury, his hand protectively gripping her shoulder. "Stay calm," he whispered to her. "We've done nothing wrong. This will get sorted out."
Jennifer stood a few feet away, arms crossed triumphantly across her chest, the gold spoon clutched in her hand like a trophy. Greg hovered nearby, his earlier friendliness replaced by uncomfortable uncertainty, as he glanced between his wife and their guests. The police car pulled up to the curb, and two officers stepped out. The first was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a serious expression, while his partner was younger with an air of cautious assessment. They approached the house with measured steps, taking in the scene before them. "Thank you for coming so quickly, officers," Jennifer called out, stepping forward. "I caught this woman stealing from my home. She took one of my family heirlooms, a gold spoon. We found it in her purse." The senior officer nodded solemnly. "Ma'am, sir," he addressed Olivia and Darnell, "can you explain what's happening here?" Olivia took a deep breath, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Officer, my husband and I came to introduce ourselves to our new neighbors. We brought a gift basket and were invited inside. I went to the kitchen with Mrs. Peterson, admired a decorative box, and now I'm being accused of stealing something I never touched." "She's lying," Jennifer interjected sharply. "The spoon was in the box before she came into the kitchen, and afterward it was gone. Then we found it in her purse." Darnell stepped forward, his voice controlled but firm. "Officer, my wife is not a thief. Someone put that spoon in her bag. This doesn't make any sense. Why would we come over with a gift, only to steal a single spoon?" The younger officer pulled out a notepad. "Let's all take a step back and walk through what happened," he suggested, his tone professional but less confrontational than his partner's. Jennifer thrust the spoon toward the officers. "This is evidence," she insisted. "It was in her purse. What more do you need?" The senior officer took the spoon, examining it briefly before looking back at Olivia. "Ma'am, would you consent to us checking your purse again?" Olivia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She wanted to refuse, to demand that someone listen to her side of the story first, but she knew how that would look. "Yes," she said quietly, "I have nothing to hide." The officer took her handbag and carefully went through it, finding nothing else of note. Several neighbors had inched closer to the property line, not even pretending they weren't watching the spectacle. Olivia could hear snippets of their whispered comments. "Always knew this neighborhood was going downhill, and can't trust people these days." "Ma'am," the senior officer said, arresting Olivia, "the situation doesn't look good. We have evidence of stolen property in your possession." "This is ridiculous," Darnell interjected, his patience clearly wearing thin. "My wife is being framed, and you're not even considering that possibility." The officer's expression hardened. "Sir, I need you to step back and let us handle this." Jennifer's smug expression grew more pronounced. "Are you going to arrest her or not?" she demanded. "She stole from me, in my own home." The senior officer reached for his handcuff. "Ma'am," he said to Olivia, "I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Olivia felt the world tilting around her. This couldn't be happening, not to her, not like this. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't take any." Darnell moved protectively closer to his wife. "Officer, you're making a serious mistake," he warned, his voice tight with controlled anger. The tension in the air was palpable as neighbors watched with wide eyes, some recording on their phone. An older couple shook their heads disapprovingly, while a young mother pulled her curious children back toward their home, as if theft were contagious. "Turn around, ma'am," the officer repeated, his hand still on his handcuff. Olivia stood her ground, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This moment of humiliation, of injustice, crystallized something inside her. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket. "Before you do that," she said, her voice suddenly steady and clear, "there's something you should know." The officer paused, his expression guarded. "Ma'am." With deliberate movements, Olivia pulled out a small leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a badge that caught the afternoon sunlight. The collective gasp from the onlookers was audible in the sudden silence. Do you think the officers were too quick to judge? Subscribe if you believe in looking beyond appearances and finding the truth. "I'm Olivia Wilson, the new chief of police for Riverside County," she stated, her voice clear and authoritative as she held up her badge for everyone to see. The effect was immediate and electric. The senior officer's hand dropped from his handcuffs as if they'd suddenly burned him. His partner's notepad slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft thud on the port. Jennifer's triumphant expression dissolved into shock, her face draining of color, so rapidly she seemed to age years in seconds. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered neighbors. Phones that had been recording the confrontation were now capturing a moment none of them had anticipated. The tension in the air transformed from accusatory to something entirely different. A collective realization that a grave mistake was unfolding. "Chief Wilson," the senior officer stammered, straightening his posture. We weren't informed about your appointment. My official introduction to the department is scheduled for next week," Olivia replied coolly. "I wanted to get settled in the neighborhood first." Her gaze shifted to Jennifer, who was now clutching the doorframe for support. Clearly that was more challenging than anticipated. Darnell stood beside his wife, his earlier anger now tempered with quiet pride. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was support enough. "Now," Olivia continued, addressing the officers, "I'd like to know why you were ready to place me in handcuffs, based solely on an accusation, without conducting a proper investigation. Is that standard procedure in this department?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "No, ma'am," the senior officer admitted, his earlier confidence evaporated. "It's not. I didn't think so," Olivia said. She turned to Jennifer, whose smug superiority had been replaced by visible panic. "Mrs. Peterson, you have security cameras installed around your property. I noticed them when we arrived. Let's review the footage, shall we?" Jennifer's eyes widened further. "That's not," she began, her voice thin and strained. "The cameras aren't always recording. They malfunction sometimes." "Let's check anyway," Olivia insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. She gestured to the officers. "Would you accompany us inside to review the security footage?" The younger officer nodded quickly. "Yes, Chief." As they moved toward the door, Jennifer's panic became more evident. She blocked the entrance, her movements frantic. "This is unnecessary," she insisted. "I know what I saw. Why waste time with potentially corrupted footage?" Greg, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort, finally stepped forward. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "let them check the cameras." Inside the house, Jennifer led them to a small study, where a computer monitor displayed feeds from various cameras around the property. Her hands trembled as she accessed the security system, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if seeking a way out of her predicament. "The footage from the past hour, please," Olivia requested firmly. Jennifer hesitated, her eyes darting to a delete button on the interface. Before she could press it, Olivia's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "That would be tampering with evidence, Mrs. Peterson," Olivia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "A serious offense." The room fell silent as Jennifer reluctantly pulled up the kitchen footage. The video was crystal clear, showing Olivia admiring the golden box but never touching it. Then, when Olivia's back was turned as she looked out the window, the footage captured Jennifer opening the box, removing a gold spoon and slipping it into Olivia's purse that had been left on a chair. The silence in the room was deafening. Greg stared at his wife in disbelief, while the officers shifted uncomfortably, the reality of their near mistake weighing heavily on them. "Jennifer," Greg finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what have you done?" Jennifer's composure crumbled completely. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "I just didn't want them here. People like them don't belong in our neighborhood." "People like us?" Darnell repeated, his voice steady, but filled with controlled anger. "You mean black people?" Jennifer didn't respond, but her silence was answer enough. The senior officer stepped forward, his expression grim. "Mrs. Peterson, attempting to delete that footage would have been obstruction of justice, and filing a false police report is a criminal offense." As the officer read Jennifer her rights, Olivia watched with no satisfaction, only a profound sadness that such prejudice still existed, hidden behind friendly facades and picket fences. "You know what the saddest part is," Olivia said quietly to Jennifer as the officer prepared to escort her to the patrol car. "We really did just want to be good neighbors." Outside, the neighbors who had gathered to witness Olivia's humiliation now watched in stunned silence as Jennifer was led to the police car, her head bowed in shame. The narrative had been flipped so completely that many couldn't process what they were seeing. Did you expect this? If you believe in justice prevailing, make sure to hit that subscribe button. As the police car carrying Jennifer disappeared around the corner, a heavy silence settled over the neighborhood. The gathered crowd stood motionless, their expressions a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and shame. For the first time, they were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Beneath their community's veneer of perfection lay prejudices they had either ignored or silently endorsed. Olivia stood on the porch, her badge still in hand, surveying the faces of her new neighbors. These were the people she would be living among, working to protect, and hoping to build relationships with. The thought was both challenging and oddly motivating. "I think we've all had enough excitement for one day," she said finally, her voice carrying across the now quiet street. As people began to disperse, Olivia turned to Greg, who looked utterly devastated by his wife's actions. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hollow. "I had no idea she would do something like this." Olivia nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. "We should talk another time," she said simply. Walking back to their home, Olivia and Darnell remained silent until they were safely inside with the door closed behind them. Only then did Olivia allow her professional facade to crumble. She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. "You okay?" Darnell asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand in his. Olivia took a deep breath. "I will be," she said, "but this isn't how I imagined starting our life here." Darnell squeezed her hand. "You handled it like the leader you are," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." Olivia leaned against him, drawing strength from his presence. "It's not just about Jennifer," she said after a moment. "Did you see their face? How they all just stood there, watching, assuming we were guilty before knowing anything." Darnell nodded grimly. "I saw. That's what I'll be facing every day at work too," she continued. "People looking at me, questioning whether I belong, whether I earned my position, or was just a diversity hire. And you'll prove them wrong every single day," Darnell said firmly, "just like you did today." The following morning, Olivia stood in front of her bathroom mirror adjusting her uniform for her first official day as chief of police. The events of the previous day had left her with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about doing a job anymore. It was about changing perceptions and building bridges in a community that clearly needed it. As she and Darnell prepared to leave, he to his job as a high school principal, she to the police station, the doorbell rang. They exchanged puzzled glances before Darnell moved to answer it. On their porch stood Greg Peterson, looking tired and contrite, and beside him, an elderly woman Olivia recognized from across the street. Behind them, at a respectful distance, stood several other neighbors, each holding something: flowers, homemade bread, gift baskets.
Chief Wilson, Greg began awkwardly. We owe you and your husband an apology. What Jennifer did was inexcusable, and how we all reacted, or didn't react, was just as bad. The elderly woman stepped forward. I'm Martha Simmons, she said, her voice wavering slightly. I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and I've never been more ashamed than I was yesterday. We failed you as neighbors, and as decent human beings. One by one, the neighbors introduced themselves, offering sincere apologies and tentative welcomes. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't erase what had happened, but it was in the weeks that followed, Olivia used the incident as a catalyst for change. She organized community meetings at the local recreation center, invited speakers to discuss implicit bias, and opened her home for honest conversations about race and prejudice. Initially, attendance was sparse. Many residents were too embarrassed or defensive to participate, but gradually, the numbers grew. Jennifer's case became a talking point, not to shame her but to understand how prejudice could warp perception and lead to harmful action. After serving a brief sentence for filing a false police report, Jennifer herself attended one of Olivia's workshops, offering a tearful apology and sharing her journey toward recognizing and addressing her own biases. 6 months later, the neighborhood had transformed. Community events were more diverse and inclusive. Residents made genuine efforts to welcome newcomers of all backgrounds, and the police department under Olivia's leadership had implemented new training protocols focused on fairness and equal treatment. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was progress. As Olivia and Darnell hosted a neighborhood barbecue in their backyard, surrounded by the very people who had once viewed them with suspicion, Olivia reflected on how a single terrible day had sparked a movement toward understanding and acceptance. Sometimes, she told Darnell as they watched their neighbors mingling and laughing together, the worst moments can lead to the best changes. He smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. And it takes someone strong enough to turn adversity into opportunity, he replied. Someone like you. If this story moved you or made you think differently about prejudice in our communities, please subscribe to Change Weavers. Together, we can create a world where people are judged by their character, not their color. Every story has the power to transform hearts and minds, including